I always wondered why my best friend Penelope insisted on booking the entire rooftop terrace at Meridian Heights for my 35th birthday celebration. Now, watching my husband Judd lean in to kiss Penelope passionately in front of our closest friends and family, everything made perfect sense. Penelope Gray, my supposed best friend of 12 years, had orchestrated the perfect stage for my complete and utter humiliation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emily Duvall, and until tonight, I thought I had everything figured out. At 35, I was a successful financial advisor at Pinnacle Wealth Management, married to Judd Prentis, a charismatic marketing director at one of the city's most prestigious advertising agencies. Our life looked picture-perfect from the outside. A beautiful downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, 2 luxury cars in our private garage, and a social circle that revolved around the kind of people who made headlines in the lifestyle sections of local magazines. Penelope Gray had been my anchor through it all. We'd met in college during our sophomore year when she transferred from the East Coast, and she'd quickly become the sister I never had. While I was methodical and analytical, traits that served me well in financial planning, Penelope was spontaneous and magnetic. She had this way of lighting up any room she entered, her auburn hair catching the light just so, her emerald eyes sparkling with mischief and warmth. She'd built a successful event planning business, Gray Matter Events, specializing in high-end corporate functions and exclusive social gatherings. Her client list read like a who's who of the city's elite. What made our friendship so special was how perfectly we complemented each other. I provided the stability and practical wisdom, she brought adventure and creativity. When Judd and I got married 4 years ago, there was never any question that Penelope would be my maid of honor. She'd planned our engagement party, coordinated our wedding with military precision, and had been there for every milestone since. Judd and I had what everyone called a power couple relationship. He was tall, devastatingly handsome with those piercing blue eyes and that confident smile that had first caught my attention at a networking event 6 years ago. His success in advertising was built on his ability to read people, to understand what they wanted before they knew it themselves. He was the kind of man who remembered details, your favorite coffee order, the anniversary of your father's death, the name of your childhood pet. These qualities made him both an excellent husband and, as I would later discover, an exceptional deceiver. Our home was a testament to our combined success. The loft featured an open-concept design with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that gleamed under strategically placed pendant lighting, and a kitchen island where we'd hosted countless dinner parties. The living room boasted a stunning view of the harbor, where we'd spend weekend mornings drinking coffee and reading the financial papers together. It was in this very space that Penelope would often join us for impromptu brunches, the 3 of us laughing over mimosas and planning our next adventure. The trust between us was absolute. Penelope had her own key to our loft. She'd earned it after house-sitting during our honeymoon to Italy. She knew the alarm code, where we kept the spare car keys, and had access to our shared calendar for coordinating social events. More intimately, she knew our relationship dynamics, our inside jokes, our vulnerabilities. I'd confided in her about everything: my occasional insecurities about Judd's female colleagues, my fears about starting a family, my struggles with my demanding mother who lived 3 hours away in the suburbs. 3 weeks before my birthday, Penelope had approached me with uncharacteristic intensity. We were having our usual Wednesday evening wine and tapas at Bella Corda, a cozy Spanish restaurant that had become our regular spot. The autumn evening was crisp, and she was wearing a burgundy cashmere sweater that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. "Emily," she'd said, reaching across the small table to grab my hand, "I want to do something really special for your 35th. This is a milestone birthday, and you deserve to be celebrated properly." I'd laughed, taking a sip of the Tempranillo she'd ordered. "Pen, you know I'm not big on grand gestures. A dinner party at home would be perfect. Maybe 20 people, good food, nothing too elaborate." But she'd shaken her head, her expression serious in a way that was unusual for her. "No, absolutely not. You always downplay yourself, Em. You've worked so hard this year, the promotion to senior advisor, the Morrison account success, Everything. Let me handle this. Trust me. The word trust hung in the air between us, and I'd smiled, squeezing her hand back. Okay, but nothing too crazy. You know how Judd feels about over-the-top events. Oh, don't worry about Judd, she'd said, her voice carrying an odd note I couldn't quite identify at the time. I'll make sure he's completely on board with everything. In hindsight, the signs were there, but they were so subtle, so perfectly disguised as normal behavior, that I missed them completely. Penelope began spending more time at our loft, often arriving early for our planned activities and staying late into the evening. She'd engage Judd in lengthy conversations about his work, asking detailed questions about his current campaigns and clients. At the time, I'd been pleased by their growing friendship, happy that two of the most important people in my life were developing their own connection. Judd, meanwhile, had become increasingly interested in fitness, joining a new gym downtown that Penelope had recommended. He'd started dressing differently too, more expensive cologne, tailored shirts that emphasized his broad shoulders, a new haircut that made him look younger and more polished. When I'd complimented him on these changes, he'd smiled and said he wanted to step up his game professionally. You inspire me to be better, Em, he'd said one morning, as he adjusted his new silk tie in our bedroom mirror. Watching you succeed makes me want to match your level of excellence. Their text messages became more frequent too. I'd noticed Judd's phone lighting up with notifications from Penelope throughout the evening, and when I'd ask about it, he'd casually explain that she was coordinating birthday party details and wanted to keep everything perfect for me. She's really going all out, he'd said one night, as we were getting ready for bed. The woman has a spreadsheet for everything. I can see why her business is so successful. As my birthday approached, the excitement in our social circle was palpable. Penelope had been tight-lipped about the details, only revealing that the party would be held at Meridian Heights, an upscale rooftop venue known for hosting the city's most exclusive events. The location alone suggested that this wouldn't be the intimate gathering I'd requested, but when I'd expressed concern about the expense, Penelope had waved me off. Don't worry about money, Em. This is my gift to you, my expertise, my connections, everything. Just show up and be beautiful. The night before my birthday, Judd had seemed unusually nervous. He'd paced around our loft, checking his phone constantly, and had gone to bed early, claiming he wanted to be well rested for the celebration. I'd attributed his behavior to work stress and the pressure of the upcoming party. Thank you for being so supportive of Penelope's plans, I'd whispered to him as we lay in the darkness. I know elaborate parties aren't your thing, but it means everything to me that you're embracing this. He'd kissed my forehead softly, his lips lingering longer than usual. Anything for you, Em. You deserve the world. Those words would echo in my mind hours later, as I watched that same mouth betray me in the most public and devastating way possible. The morning of my 35th birthday dawned crisp and clear, with October sunlight streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows. Judd had woken me with coffee in bed, and a small wrapped box containing a delicate silver bracelet with a single diamond charm. For the birthday girl, he'd said, his blue eyes twinkling as he fastened it around my wrist. Something beautiful for someone beautiful. Penelope had arrived mid-morning with a garment bag and an arsenal of beauty products, declaring that she was going to personally ensure I looked absolutely stunning for the evening. As she bustled around our bedroom, setting up what looked like a professional makeup station, I felt a surge of gratitude for her friendship. Pen, this is too much, I'd protested, as she began laying out what appeared to be hundreds of dollars worth of cosmetics. Nothing is too much for you, Emily, she'd replied, her voice warm but her eyes holding something I couldn't quite read. Tonight is going to be unforgettable. And as I prepared to step into what I believed would be a celebration of my life and achievements, I had no idea that she was absolutely right, though not in the way either of us had originally planned. The evening air was crisp with that October bite that made the city lights sparkle more brilliantly against the darkening sky. Judd and I arrived at Meridian Heights at 7:30 sharp, fashionably late as Penelope had instructed. The building itself was a monument to modern luxury, 30 floors of glass and steel rising from the heart of the financial district, with the exclusive rooftop terrace, accessible only by private elevator. As we stepped out of the elevator onto the terrace, I gasped, despite myself. Penelope had transformed the space into something out of a fairy tale. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thousands of twinkling lights were strung overhead, creating a canopy of stars against the city skyline. Tall glass vases filled with white orchids and eucalyptus adorned every surface, their elegant stems catching the warm glow of strategically placed candles. The harbor stretched out below us, its dark waters reflecting the lights from the surrounding buildings like scattered diamonds. This is incredible," Judd whispered, his hand finding the small of my back as we took in the scene. Penelope really outdid herself. I nodded, temporarily speechless. Whatever tensions I'd felt about the elaborate nature of the celebration melted away in the face of such obvious care and attention to detail. Round tables dressed in cream linens were scattered across the terrace, each adorned with centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A full bar had been set up in one corner, staffed by professional bartenders in crisp white shirts and black bow ties. In another corner, a string quartet played soft jazz, their music floating through the evening air like a gentle caress. As we moved through the space, I began to recognize the faces gathering around us, and my amazement grew. Penelope hadn't just invited our usual crowd, she'd assembled what felt like a comprehensive anthology of my life. My colleagues from Pinnacle Wealth Management were there, including my boss Paul Gibson, a notoriously difficult man to impress who rarely attended social functions. My college roommate Lucy had flown in from Denver, her presence a complete surprise that brought tears to my eyes. "Lucy, I can't believe you're here," I exclaimed, embracing her tightly. "Are you kidding? Miss Emily Duvall's 35th birthday extravaganza." Penelope made it very clear that my attendance was non-negotiable. Lucy laughed, her familiar warmth flooding through me. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually enjoy your own party instead of networking the whole time." My family was there too. My parents had driven down from their suburban home. My younger brother Charlie had taken time off from his residency at the hospital, and even my notoriously antisocial Uncle Emmett had made an appearance. The sight of them all together, dressed up and clearly excited to celebrate with me, created a warm bubble of happiness in my chest. But it wasn't just family and close friends. Penelope had somehow managed to invite clients whose portfolios I managed, people from Judd's advertising agency, members of our country club, and what appeared to be half of the city's young professional network. The guest list was a carefully curated representation of our entire social and professional ecosystem. Penelope herself was in her element, gliding through the crowd in a stunning emerald silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly and complemented her auburn hair, which was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck. She wore the diamond earrings I'd helped her pick out for her own birthday last year, and they caught the light every time she turned her head, which was often. She seemed to be everywhere at once, greeting guests, directing the catering staff, ensuring every detail was flawless. "Emily, darling," she called out as she approached us, her arms outstretched for an embrace. "You look absolutely radiant. That dress is perfect on you." I looked down at the navy blue cocktail dress she'd helped me select during a shopping trip the previous weekend. It was more form-fitting than my usual style, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light as I moved. At the time I'd worried it was too attention-grabbing, but Penelope had insisted. "It's your birthday, Em. You should be the most beautiful woman in the room," she'd said, while we stood in the boutique's fitting room. "Trust me, this dress will make Judd fall in love with you all over again." Now, seeing how the dress moved in the evening light, how it complemented the diamond bracelet Judd had given me that morning, I was grateful for her insistence. I felt beautiful, confident, ready to be celebrated. "Pen, this is beyond anything I could have imagined," I said, squeezing her hands. "Thank you for making this so special." "Oh honey, the night is just getting started," she replied, her emerald eyes sparkling with what I interpreted as excitement, but would later recognize as anticipation of a different kind. "I have some surprises planned that I know will make this absolutely unforgettable." As the evening progressed, I noticed that Judd seemed increasingly restless. He'd started the night with his usual social charm, working the room with the practiced ease of someone who made his living understanding people and their motivations. But as more guests arrived, and the party hit its stride, he became more withdrawn, checking his phone frequently, and scanning the crowd with an intensity that seemed out of place at a birthday celebration. "Everything okay?" I asked him during a brief moment when we found ourselves alone by the bar. "Of course," he said quickly, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Just making sure everything's perfect for you. This is a big night." He ordered us both champagne, Dom Perignon, which I noticed with a mixture of gratitude and concern. The evening was already expensive enough without adding $200 bottles of champagne to the tab. But when I started to protest, Judd silenced me with a kiss on the cheek. "It's your 35th birthday, Em. Some occasions call for the good stuff." As he handed me the flute, I noticed his hands were slightly trembling. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off as excitement and the crisp evening air, but something in his demeanor felt off-kilter, like a piano that was just slightly out of tune, not wrong enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to create an underlying discord. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was watching a carefully choreographed performance unfold around me. Penelope moved through the party with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra, positioning people with seemingly casual conversations, creating natural groupings that would provide the perfect audience for what was to come. She'd placed my parents at a table with a clear view of the central area where the bar and string quartet were positioned. My colleagues from work were scattered throughout the space, but all with sightlines to the same general area. Even the catering staff seemed to be following some invisible script, ensuring that drinks were refilled and appetizers circulated at precise intervals. "Your friend is remarkable," commented Mrs. Chloe Prentis, Judd's mother, as she joined me near the terrace railing. "The attention to detail, the guest coordination, she's turned event planning into an art form." I beamed with pride at the compliment. "She really is amazing. I'm so lucky to have her in my life." Mrs. Prentis studied me with the sharp intelligence that had made her a successful real estate developer. "You two have quite a bond. It's rare to see female friendships that deep and trusting." 12 years of friendship will do that," I replied, raising my champagne glass to toast the sentiment. "We've been through everything together." "Everything," she repeated, her tone thoughtful. "That's quite a foundation." At the time I took her words as a celebration of female friendship. Later I would remember the odd inflection in her voice, and wonder if she'd seen something I'd missed. As 9 o'clock approached, I could sense a shift in the party's energy. Conversations became more animated, laughter grew louder, and there was a feeling of anticipation in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something significant to happen. Penelope had mentioned earlier that she'd planned some special surprises for the evening, and I assumed we were building toward the traditional birthday toast and cake cutting. Judd had disappeared briefly, claiming he needed to make a quick business call, but I'd seen him talking intensely with Penelope near the elevator. When he returned, his nervous energy had transformed into something else, a kind of determined focus that reminded me of how he looked before presenting a major campaign to a client. "Ladies and gentlemen," Penelope's voice rang out across the terrace as she moved to the center of the space, somehow commanding attention without raising her voice. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment. The string quartet quieted their music, conversations died down, and all eyes turned toward her. I felt Judd's hand on my elbow, gently guiding me toward the center of the gathering, positioning me so that I was facing our assembled guests with the spectacular city view as my backdrop. "Thank you all for being here tonight, to celebrate our dear Emily," Penelope continued, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "But before we begin the traditional birthday festivities, there's something very important that needs to be shared with all of you." I looked around at the expectant faces, my family, my friends, my colleagues, all waiting with smiles and raised glasses. My heart swelled with gratitude and love for the people who'd gathered to celebrate with me. I had no idea that in the next few moments, every single one of those relationships would be forever changed. The silence that followed Penelope's announcement was electric, charged with anticipation. I stood in the center of the terrace, surrounded by twinkling lights and faces of everyone I held dear, still smiling expectantly, waiting for whatever surprise Penelope had orchestrated. "Emily," Judd's voice cut through the evening air, and I turned toward him with curiosity. His blue eyes held an intensity I'd never seen before, determination mixed with something that looked almost like regret. Before we celebrate another year of your life, there's something I need to say. My heart fluttered with excitement. Maybe this was all an elaborate setup for some grand romantic gesture. The setting was certainly perfect for something momentous. You've been an incredible wife, Judd continued, his voice carrying across the silent terrace. 4 years of marriage, and you've supported every dream, every ambition, every goal I've set for myself. Around us, guests smiled, some women getting that soft romantic look that appeared during displays of marital devotion. My mother had her hand pressed to her heart, eyes glistening with what I assumed were tears of joy. But sometimes, Judd's voice took on a different quality, harder somehow. Life takes us in directions we never expected. Sometimes we discover things about ourselves that we never knew existed. The first cold finger of doubt traced down my spine. This didn't sound like romance anymore. What I've discovered, Judd continued, is that love doesn't always follow the rules we set for it. Love doesn't always respect the boundaries we think are sacred. My champagne flute suddenly felt heavy. I glanced at Penelope, seeking reassurance, but what I saw made my stomach lurch. She wasn't confused by Judd's strange speech, she was watching him with rapt attention, emerald eyes bright with anticipation. Emily, you deserve honesty, Judd said. You deserve to know that for the past 8 months, I've been living a lie. We've been living a lie. 8 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. 8 months meant this had started when he'd joined that new gym, when he'd started dressing differently. 8 months ago, Judd continued, I discovered what it means to feel truly, completely alive with another person. I turned slowly, following his gaze, and saw Penelope stepping forward from her position near the bar. She moved with graceful confidence, but now there was something different, something triumphant and possessive, I'd never seen before. What Judd is trying to tell you, Penelope said, her voice carrying easily across the silent terrace, is that we've fallen in love, Emily. Real, honest, passionate love. The words hit like a physical blow. My champagne flute slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the terrace floor. The Dom Perignon spread across the polished surface, like a golden stain. We never meant for this to happen, Penelope continued, moving closer to Judd. But the heart wants what it wants, and denying it would be a disservice to everyone involved. I watched in horrified fascination as she reached his side, as his arm curved around her waist with practiced ease. They fit together perfectly, her height complementing his, her auburn hair stunning against his navy suit. They had the natural harmony of a couple that had been together much longer than 8 months. The weekend business trips, I heard myself say. The new cologne, the gym membership. Yes, Judd said simply, relief in his voice. All of it, Em. We've been trying to find the right way to tell you, the right time, the right place. And you thought my birthday party was the right time. The words came out sharper than intended. We thought you'd want to hear it here, surrounded by everyone who loves you, Penelope said. Words perfectly calculated to sound caring while delivering maximum damage. We thought having all your support system here would help you process this news. I looked out at the faces surrounding us, family, friends, colleagues, all frozen in shock and discomfort. My mother's face had gone pale, my father's expression was darkening with rage. My brother Charlie looked like he was calculating the distance to Judd's throat. You planned this, I said suddenly, pieces clicking into place. The venue, the guest list, the timing, you planned this entire evening, as the stage for my humiliation. We planned this evening as a celebration of new beginnings, Penelope corrected, but there was a gleam in her emerald eyes suggesting she was enjoying this far more than her words indicated. I stepped forward, moving closer to where they stood together, still touching, still presenting their rehearsed united front. The broken champagne glass crunched under my heels. But most importantly, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the terrace, I understand that you've both made a tremendous mistake. I reached up and unclasped the diamond bracelet Judd had given me that morning. With deliberate care, I let it fall onto the terrace floor, where it landed with a soft metallic chime among the glass shards. "You wanted new beginnings?" I asked, looking directly into Penelope's emerald eyes, then shifting to Judd's increasingly pale face. "You wanted to follow your hearts wherever they led." I smiled then, an expression that felt foreign but somehow perfectly appropriate. "Well, congratulations, you're both about to get exactly what you deserve." The threat was quiet, understated, delivered with calm precision that made it infinitely more terrifying than screaming would have been. I saw understanding flicker in both their faces, the sudden realization that they had underestimated not just my capacity for restraint, but my capacity for retaliation. "And trust me," I added, voice carrying that strange cold smile, "you're going to regret this moment for the rest of your lives." The silence that followed my threat stretched across the terrace like a taut wire. I could feel 60 pairs of eyes watching, waiting to see how I would react to the most public humiliation imaginable. Some faces showed shock, others disgust, a few displayed morbid fascination, but what struck me most was the mixture of pity and anticipation. They expected me to break down, to scream, to throw the kind of hysterical fit that would make their betrayal seem almost justified. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and took a deep, measured breath. The cool October air filled my lungs, clearing away shock and replacing it with something far more dangerous: absolute clarity. "You know what's truly remarkable about this moment?" I said, my voice carrying with calm authority. "The sheer audacity of believing that announcing your affair at my birthday party somehow makes it noble." I turned slowly, making eye contact with different sections of the crowd. My mother was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. My father's face had turned dangerous red, but something in my demeanor kept him seated and silent. 8 months, I continued, savoring how the number echoed in the evening air. 8 months of secret meetings, clandestine phone calls, and elaborate lies. 8 months of looking me in the eye every single day and pretending to be the people I trusted most in this world. I walked slowly around the center of the terrace, heels clicking against polished surface with metronomic precision. The broken champagne glass crunched softly under my feet, but I paid no attention. My focus was entirely on the two people who had orchestrated this elaborate betrayal. "The new gym membership," I said, stopping to face Judd directly. "Let me guess. Penelope joined the same gym around the same time. What a coincidence." The slight tightening around his eyes told me I'd hit the mark. "And the weekend business trips," I continued, turning to Penelope. "I suppose you had convenient event planning emergencies that took you out of town on exactly the same weekends?" Her emerald eyes flashed with something that might have been admiration for my deductive abilities. "The late-night phone calls about party planning," I went on, voice growing stronger. "The sudden interest in each other's work. The way you both started dressing better, taking more care with your appearances. I actually thought you were both just becoming more successful, more confident people." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "And maybe you are. Maybe conducting an elaborate affair while manipulating your victim into trusting you completely is exactly the kind of skill set that leads to success in your respective fields." I stopped walking and planted my feet firmly, facing them both with steady composure I'd learned in years of delivering difficult financial news to clients. "Let's examine this from a professional perspective, shall we? Judd, as a marketing expert, you understand timing, setting, and audience. This announcement, my birthday party, surrounded by our entire network, this wasn't spontaneous passion, this was a calculated campaign." Judd's face had gone pale, but I could see wheels turning behind his eyes. He was beginning to realize that the woman standing before him wasn't the same person who had woken up in his arms that morning. "And Penelope," I continued, "as an event planner, you understand better than anyone how to create perfect atmosphere for maximum impact. The venue, the guest list, the timing, this entire evening was designed not just to celebrate my birthday, but to provide the ideal stage for my humiliation." I gestured broadly at the elaborate setup around us, twinkling lights, perfect floral arrangements, carefully positioned tables that ensured everyone had a clear view of where we now stood. The question is, did you plan this as my birthday party, and then decide it would make the perfect backdrop for your announcement, or did you plan the announcement first and work backwards to create the perfect setting for it? But let's set aside the professional analysis, I said, tone shifting to something more intimate. Let's talk about what this really cost. I reached into my evening purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling through it with deliberate slowness. The text messages I sent you, Penelope, asking for advice about my marriage when I sensed Judd was pulling away. The conversations where I worried that maybe I wasn't exciting enough, attractive enough, successful enough to keep my husband interested. Penelope's face had lost some of its earlier confidence. The nights I spent awake, wondering if there was something wrong with me, something I was missing, some way I was failing as a wife. I looked directly at Judd. The conversations where you reassured me that everything was fine, that I was imagining things, that you loved me more than ever. I scrolled further through my phone. The photos from just last month, the three of us at brunch, laughing together like the best of friends. Penelope helping me choose the lingerie I bought to surprise my husband. Judd planning our anniversary dinner, while simultaneously planning his exit strategy. I reached down and picked up the diamond bracelet I'd dropped earlier, holding it up so it caught the light from the twinkling strands overhead. The single diamond sparkled brilliantly, beautiful and clear, and completely worthless in the context of the lies that surrounded it. This bracelet, I said, turning it over in my palm, was supposed to represent 4 years of marriage, 12 years of friendship, and countless years of future happiness together. I walked over to the terrace railing, and without ceremony, threw the bracelet into the night. It disappeared into the darkness, a small bright flash falling toward the city streets 30 floors below. But it turns out it was just another prop in your elaborate performance, I said, turning back to face them. And I don't keep souvenirs from shows I didn't enjoy. The gesture was simple, definitive, and somehow more powerful than any amount of screaming could have been. It said everything about the value I now placed on their gifts, promises and presence in my life. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, voice taking on the authoritative tone I used when delivering final financial recommendations. You wanted new beginnings, you wanted to follow your hearts wherever they led. You wanted to pursue this grand love affair without the inconvenience of my presence. I smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that made several people in the crowd actually step backward. Congratulations. You're about to get everything you asked for, and so much more than you ever imagined possible. The moment after delivering my promise, I felt strange calm settle over me like a protective shroud. The chaos of emotions, shock, betrayal, humiliation, rage, suddenly crystallized into something far more dangerous, absolute clarity of purpose. I looked around at the faces of our guests, one final time, memorizing expressions of shock, pity and uncomfortable fascination that would fuel my motivation in the weeks to come. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, I announced, voice carrying with professional composure. This has certainly been an enlightening birthday celebration, and I'm sure it will be memorable for all the right reasons. The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had come expecting cake and champagne. Instead, they had witnessed the surgical dismantling of two people's credibility in real time. Please, don't let our announcement interrupt your evening, I continued, gesturing gracefully toward the elaborate spread Penelope had orchestrated. The food is excellent, the champagne is expensive, and the view is spectacular. Enjoy it all. Someone certainly paid a great deal for this experience. My eyes found Penelope's face as I delivered that last line, and I saw her flinch at the implication. I turned to leave, but stopped at my parents' table. My mother was still crying quietly, mascara streaking down her cheeks. My father had risen, his face dark with controlled fury that had made him formidable in business negotiations for 30 years. "Mom, Dad," I said softly, leaning down to kiss my mother's forehead. "Thank you for coming. I know this wasn't the evening any of us expected." "Emily, sweetheart," my mother whispered, reaching up to touch my face with trembling fingers. What are you going to do? I smiled at her, and for the first time all evening, the expression felt genuine. I'm going to be absolutely fine. Better than fine, actually. But I need you both to trust me, and let me handle this my way. My father's hand found my shoulder, grip firm and reassuring. Do you need anything? A place to stay? Legal representation? Someone to help you figure out? Dad, I interrupted gently but firmly. I love you for wanting to protect me, but I need you to resist that impulse. No dramatic gestures, no confrontations, no attempts to fix this situation. Can you do that for me? He studied my face carefully, and I could see him processing what he was seeing there. The broken, humiliated daughter he expected to comfort was nowhere to be found. Instead, he was looking at someone who reminded him of himself during his most successful business campaigns, focused, determined, and quietly dangerous. You have a plan, he said, and it wasn't a question. I have the beginning of a plan, I corrected, and it's going to require patience, precision, and absolute discretion from everyone who loves me. Can I count on that? Both my parents nodded, though I could see the effort it cost them to suppress their protective instincts. I made my way around the terrace systematically, stopping at each table to speak briefly with guests. The conversations were variations on the same theme, expressions of shock, offers of support, questions about my immediate plans, but I handled each one with the same calm professionalism. When I reached Paul Gibson, my boss, he stood immediately and drew me slightly away from his table where several other colleagues were seated. Emily, he said quietly, voice carrying concern that had made him an effective manager for 15 years. I want you to know that this doesn't change anything about your position with us. Your personal life is your personal life, and your professional performance speaks for itself. Thank you, Paul. That means more than you know, I replied. I hope I can continue to count on your discretion regarding tonight's events. Of course, he said immediately. Though I have to ask, are you going to be able to focus on work over the next few weeks? The Morrison account review is coming up, and the Morrison account will be handled with my usual attention to detail, I interrupted, and something in my tone made him take a step back. If anything, I think you'll find my focus has become remarkably sharp recently. He studied my face, processing the same thing my father had recognized. This wasn't a woman falling apart. This was a woman who had just discovered exactly what she was capable of. The elevator ride down 30 floors gave me exactly enough time to begin mentally cataloging everything I would need to handle in the immediate aftermath. Financial accounts, living arrangements, professional considerations, legal implications. The list was extensive, but manageable. I had built a career on managing complex financial situations. This was simply a different kind of portfolio that needed restructuring. Instead of driving to the loft I had shared with Judd for 4 years, I pointed the car toward downtown until I found an upscale hotel. The Grand Harbor Hotel wasn't far from our home, but it might as well have been on another planet. Here I could think clearly without the ghosts of our shared life haunting every corner. The hotel suite I booked was modest but comfortable, with a desk and reliable internet access. I ordered room service and opened my laptop. The first step was information gathering. I logged into our shared accounts to understand exactly what our financial situation looked like. 4 years of marriage had resulted in a complex web of shared assets, joint investments, and intertwined financial obligations. Understanding that landscape would be crucial for what came next. The second step was documentation. I began writing down everything I could remember about the past 8 months, Judd's behavior changes, Penelope's increased presence in our lives, the subtle signs I had missed or dismissed. Every detail might be important later. The third step was network analysis. I opened my contacts and began categorizing everyone I knew into 3 groups: allies, neutrals, and enemies. The allies were people like my family, people whose loyalty I could count on. The neutrals were professional contacts and casual acquaintances who would likely remain uninvolved. The enemies were Judd and Penelope, obviously, but also anyone whose loyalty they might be able to claim in the coming conflict. As I worked through these tasks, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The Emily who had woken up that morning, trusting, optimistic, perhaps naively confident in the stability of her life, was gone. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, and infinitely more dangerous. This new Emily understood that Judd and Penelope had made a critical error tonight. They had assumed that public humiliation would leave me broken and defenseless. Instead, they had given me something far more valuable: absolute moral authority, and the complete sympathy of everyone who mattered. They had also revealed their capacity for cruelty and calculation in a way that would be impossible to deny or rationalize. Everyone who had witnessed tonight's spectacle would remember not just the betrayal, but the cold precision with which it had been delivered. Most importantly, they had given me a gift they never intended. They had freed me from any obligation to consider their feelings, their reputations, or their futures. I no longer needed to worry about being fair or proportionate in my response. As I closed my laptop and prepared for what would likely be a sleepless night, I realized that tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life. And unlike the ending they had tried to write for me tonight, this chapter would be entirely under my control. I woke in the hotel suite at exactly 6 a.m., my internal clock unaffected by the previous night's upheaval. The October sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the impersonal but elegant furniture. For a moment, I felt disoriented. This wasn't my bed. These weren't my sheets. And then the events of the previous evening came rushing back with crystalline clarity. My phone was buzzing with notifications. 17 missed calls from Judd, 43 text messages from various numbers, and what appeared to be dozens of voicemails. I scrolled through the messages methodically, cataloging them for future reference. Most were from friends and family expressing shock and offering support. Several were from colleagues who had witnessed the spectacle, and 3 were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably journalists who had somehow gotten wind of the story. I deleted nothing. In the coming weeks, every piece of communication could potentially be useful. Over room service coffee and a breakfast I barely tasted, I began the systematic process of investigating my own life. 4 years of marriage had created an extensive digital footprint, and I intended to examine every pixel of it. I started with our joint banking accounts, credit card statements, and investment portfolios. What I found was a pattern of financial behavior that had been invisible to me when I trusted the people involved, but now stood out like neon signs in the darkness. Unusual charges to restaurants I'd never been to, hotel bookings that coincided with Judd's supposed business trips, and gym memberships that I now realized had been paid for with our joint credit card. The most damning discovery was a series of charges to a jewelry store downtown, expensive purchases made over the past 3 months that had never appeared as gifts for me. I screenshot everything, creating a digital file that would serve as the foundation for what was to come. My first call was to Sarah Chen, a divorce attorney whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary in our social circle. We'd met at several charity events, and I'd always been impressed by her combination of legal brilliance and strategic thinking. Emily, Sarah's voice was warm but professional when she answered. I heard about last night. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, I replied, surprising her with my tone. Be ready to work. I need the best representation possible, and I need it to be absolutely confidential until I'm ready to make my move. There was a pause, and I could hear the shift in her attitude as she recognized that this wasn't a woman seeking emotional support. This was a woman preparing for war. I can see you this afternoon, she said. My office, 3 o'clock. Bring everything, financial documents, evidence of the affair, anything that might be relevant. I'll be there, I confirmed. And Sarah, I want to understand not just what I'm entitled to, but what weapons are available to me. My second call was to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. I'd met him during a client consultation 2 years ago, when one of my investment clients suspected their business partner of embezzlement. Marcus had been thorough, discreet, and devastatingly effective. Miss Duvall, Marcus said when I reached him. What can I do for you? I need a complete background investigation on 2 individuals, I said, reading him Penelope's and Judd's full names and basic information. I want to know everything: financial history, professional relationships, personal associations, previous romantic entanglements, anything that might be relevant to understanding their character and motivations. How far back do you want me to go? As far as you can. College, previous jobs, family history, everything. And Marcus, I need this to be completely confidential, and I need it to be comprehensive enough to understand exactly who I'm dealing with. Understood. I'll have preliminary findings for you within 72 hours. While waiting for my afternoon appointment with Sarah, I turned my attention to social media archaeology. Both Judd and Penelope were active on various platforms, and their digital behavior over the past 8 months would tell a story they probably hadn't realized they were writing. I created a timeline of their posts, comments, and interactions, looking for patterns that would reveal the progression of their relationship. What I found was a masterclass in digital deception, carefully crafted posts that maintained the illusion of normalcy while hiding their growing connection. The most revealing discovery was a series of liked posts and comments that showed they'd been monitoring each other's activity far more closely than either had monitored mine. Restaurant recommendations that appeared on both their feeds, vacation destinations they'd both researched, even books and movies they'd both engaged with, all creating a digital breadcrumb trail of their shared interests and secret communication. My next priority was protecting my assets and establishing my financial independence. I called my bank and arranged to open individual accounts, transferring my personal funds and ensuring that my salary would be deposited separately going forward. I contacted my financial advisor and arranged to review all joint investments, identifying which assets I would want to claim in any divorce settlement. Most importantly, I began the process of documenting our shared assets with forensic precision. Real estate, investments, vehicles, valuable personal property, everything needed to be cataloged and appraised. The loft alone was worth nearly $2 million, and our combined investment portfolio was substantial. I also discovered something that made my planning much easier. Judd had been careless about our joint finances during his affair. The paper trail of his deception was extensive and well documented, creating a clear picture of someone who had been using marital assets to fund his betrayal. That afternoon, I met with Sarah Chen in her downtown office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the harbor. Sarah was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an impeccable reputation for protecting her clients' interests with ruthless efficiency. Before we begin, Sarah said as we settled into her conference room, I want to make sure we understand each other. What exactly are you looking to accomplish here? Complete financial independence, maximum asset retention, and strategic leverage over both my husband and his mistress, I replied without hesitation. I want them to understand that their betrayal will cost them everything they value. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then smiled. I think we're going to work very well together. Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect my interests while maximizing the consequences for Judd and Penelope. The key was timing. Moving too quickly would limit our options, but waiting too long might allow them to protect themselves. When Marcus called that evening with his preliminary findings, I was sitting in my hotel suite with a legal pad full of notes and a laptop full of evidence. What he told me was better than I had dared to hope. Your husband has some interesting financial irregularities, Marcus began. Several large cash withdrawals over the past few months, payments to a credit card you're not listed on, and some questionable business expense claims that don't match his actual travel patterns. And Penelope, even more interesting, her event planning business is leveraged to the limit. She's behind on several major vendor payments, and there are some questions about how she's handling client deposits. Also, this isn't her first time getting involved with a married client. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I found records of a previous incident about 3 years ago. A married couple hired her to plan their anniversary party, and 6 months later the husband left his wife for Miss Gray. The divorce was messy, and there were allegations that she had deliberately targeted the marriage. I sat back in my chair, feeling the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about passion or love. This was about a pattern of behavior that suggested something far more calculating than either Judd or Penelope had admitted. Keep digging, I told Marcus. I want to know everything about that previous case, and I want to know if there are any others. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my situation was even better than I'd initially thought. I wasn't just dealing with 2 people who had betrayed me, I was dealing with two people who had made a career of deception and manipulation, and unlike their previous victims, I was going to fight back. 3 days after my birthday party, I made my first calculated move. I had spent those 72 hours gathering intelligence, consulting with legal counsel, and preparing the groundwork for what was to come. Now it was time to begin the systematic dismantling of everything Judd and Penelope had built their lives upon. My target was Judd's professional reputation at Sterling and Associates, the prestigious advertising agency, where he served as senior marketing director. I had intimate knowledge of his current campaigns, his client relationships, and most importantly, his recent ethical shortcuts that he thought no one had noticed. The Morrison Hotel Group account was Judd's pride and joy, a multi-million-dollar contract that had elevated his status within the agency. What the Morrison executives didn't know was that Judd had been inflating his expense reports for months, billing personal charges as business expenses, and using their account to fund his affair with Penelope. I compiled every piece of evidence I'd gathered: credit card statements showing romantic dinners, billed as client meetings, hotel charges for weekend getaways, claimed as research trips, and even spa services for two that had been categorized as team-building exercises. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Then I made an anonymous call to Morrison's chief financial officer, a meticulous woman named Jennifer Walsh, whom I'd met at several industry events. I provided her with specific dates and amounts to investigate, couching my tip as coming from a concerned party who values the integrity of business relationships. Within 24 hours, Sterling and Associates received a formal inquiry from Morrison Hotel Group requesting detailed documentation of all expenses charged to their account over the past year. The request sent shockwaves through the agency, as Morrison represented nearly 30% of their annual revenue. I watched from my office at Pinnacle Wealth Management as the crisis unfolded. Through my network of professional contacts, I learned that Judd had been called into emergency meetings with the agency's partners. His expense reports were being scrutinized with forensic intensity, and the discrepancies were becoming impossible to explain. The beauty of this approach was its deniability. I hadn't made any false accusations or fabricated evidence. I had simply directed attention to Judd's own actions. His betrayal of his employers mirrored his betrayal of our marriage, and the consequences would be entirely of his own making. My phone buzzed with a text from Judd. We need to talk. Something's happening at work and I think someone is trying to sabotage me. Please call me." I deleted the message without responding. The time for conversation had ended the moment he chose to announce his affair at my birthday party. While Judd dealt with his professional crisis, I turned my attention to Penelope's business empire. Gray matter events appeared successful from the outside, but Marcus Webb's investigation had revealed a company teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Her cash flow was entirely dependent on client deposits, which she was using to pay existing vendor debts, a classic Ponzi scheme structure that would collapse the moment clients started demanding refunds. I began with her upcoming events, starting with the Blackwood Foundation Gala, a high-profile charity event scheduled for the following month. The Blackwood family was old money, conservative and extremely particular about their public image. They also valued loyalty and discretion above all else, qualities that Penelope had just demonstrated she lacked. I arranged a lunch meeting with Margaret Blackwood, ostensibly to discuss investment opportunities for the foundation's endowment. During our conversation, I casually mentioned that I'd recently learned some disturbing information about event planners who had been known to target married couples and deliberately break up families for their own gain. "It's such a violation of trust," I said, sipping my wine with perfect composure. "When you hire someone to celebrate your marriage or anniversary, you never expect them to be plotting its destruction." Margaret's expression grew stern. "Are you suggesting that someone in our circle engages in such behavior?" "I wouldn't presume to name names," I replied carefully. "But I've heard some very concerning stories about event planners who make a habit of seducing married clients. There was apparently a recent incident where such a person announced their affair with a married man at his wife's birthday party. Can you imagine the cruelty of that timing? The seed was planted. Margaret Blackwood had built her reputation on supporting only the most ethical vendors and service providers. The suggestion that her chosen event planner might be someone who destroyed marriages would be intolerable to her sense of propriety. My next strategy involved leveraging the social networks that Penelope had spent years cultivating. The society ladies who formed the backbone of her client base were incredibly influential, but they were also intensely competitive and surprisingly vindictive when they felt betrayed. I began making strategic appearances at charity luncheons, gallery openings, and social events where I knew I would encounter Penelope's key contacts. I didn't gossip or spread rumors, I didn't need to. My mere presence as the wronged wife was enough to spark conversations and speculation. Mere presence as the wronged wife was enough to spark conversations and speculation. At the Children's Hospital fundraiser, I found myself seated next to Victoria Sterling, the wife of a prominent real estate developer and one of Penelope's most influential clients. Victoria had clearly heard about my birthday party disaster, and she approached the subject with the delicate curiosity of someone fishing for gossip. "Emily dear," she said quietly, "I hope you're holding up well after everything." "Thank you for your concern," I replied with dignified grace. "It's been an adjustment, certainly. You discover so much about people's true character when they're tested." "I can't imagine," Victoria continued, "to have someone you trusted betray you so publicly. It makes one wonder what other boundaries they might cross." I nodded thoughtfully. Trust is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Once broken, it affects every relationship. I find myself questioning whether someone capable of such deception in their personal life might be equally unreliable in their professional dealings. The implication was subtle but clear: if Penelope could betray a 12-year friendship, what other ethical boundaries might she be willing to cross with clients? By the end of the week, the effects of my opening moves were becoming visible. Morrison Hotel Group had suspended their contract with Sterling and Associates, pending a full investigation of billing irregularities. The agency's partners were conducting their own internal audit, and Judd's position had become precarious. Meanwhile, Margaret Blackwood had quietly begun asking questions about Penelope's previous events and client relationships. When she learned about the incident 3 years ago involving another married couple, she was horrified. The Blackwood Foundation gala contract was terminated within days, citing irreconcilable differences regarding vendor standards. Other clients began following suit. The charity circuit was small and incestuous, news traveled fast, and reputation was everything. Penelope's carefully cultivated image as the discreet, trustworthy event planner to the elite was crumbling as whispers spread about her habit of targeting married clients. I observed these developments with clinical satisfaction. Each consequence was a direct result of their own actions and choices. I hadn't needed to lie, fabricate evidence, or make false accusations. I had simply ensured that the right people learned the truth about who they were really dealing with. The beauty of these initial strikes was their psychological impact on both targets. Judd and Penelope were experiencing professional crises that seemed unconnected to their personal betrayal, creating paranoia and uncertainty about who might be responsible and what might come next. Judd's texts became increasingly desperate. Please talk to me. I know you're angry, but this isn't just about us anymore. My entire career is being destroyed over some accounting discrepancies. I need to understand what's happening." Penelope tried a different approach, calling my office directly. "Emily, I know you hate me right now, but we need to discuss this situation rationally. There are forces at work here that are bigger than our personal drama. Can we meet for coffee?" I responded to neither of them. The time for rational discussion had passed the moment they chose public humiliation as their method of communication. Now they would learn that actions have consequences, and those consequences would continue to mount until they understood the true cost of their betrayal. As I reviewed the progress of my first week's work, I felt a deep satisfaction. This was only the beginning, but the foundation was solid. I had damaged their professional reputations without appearing vindictive, created financial pressure without seeming petty, and established a pattern of consequences that would only accelerate in the weeks to come. They had underestimated the woman they were dealing with, and that mistake would prove to be their undoing. 2 weeks after my birthday party, the pressure I had systematically applied to Judd and Penelope's professional lives was beginning to show visible results. Sterling and Associates had placed Judd on administrative leave, pending the completion of their internal investigation. The Morrison Hotel Group contract, worth nearly $3 million annually, had been officially terminated, sending shockwaves through the advertising industry. I monitored these developments from my temporary office space, a serviced corporate suite I had rented under my maiden name. From here I could orchestrate my campaign without the emotional weight of our shared home haunting my decisions. The space was sterile, functional, and perfect for the methodical work I was conducting. Penelope's situation was deteriorating even more rapidly. The Blackwood Foundation cancellation had triggered a cascade of other contract terminations as word spread through the tightly connected network of high society event planners. The Peninsula Club had pulled their annual charity auction, the Morrison family had canceled their daughter's wedding, and 3 corporate clients had requested immediate refunds of their deposits. But the real blow came when Margaret Blackwood took her concerns directly to the Better Business Bureau and the State Licensing Board. Armed with documentation of Penelope's pattern of targeting married couples, Margaret filed formal complaints that would require official investigations and public records. My investigation into Penelope's business finances had revealed a house of cards that was now collapsing with stunning velocity. Gray Matter Events operated on a razor-thin cash flow model, using new client deposits to pay existing vendor bills. With 3 major clients demanding immediate refunds totaling over $200,000, Penelope was facing immediate bankruptcy. Through my network of financial contacts, I learned that she had been forced to take out a personal loan against her downtown condo to cover the refunds. The interest rates were predatory, the terms were punitive, and the timeline for repayment was impossibly short. Within 6 months she would likely lose her home as well as her business. Judd's financial situation was becoming equally precarious. Without his Sterling & Associates salary, he was struggling to maintain his lifestyle and cover his portion of our joint expenses. Our mortgage payments, car loans, and credit card bills continued to accumulate, but his income had suddenly vanished. He was burning through his savings at an alarming rate, and his professional reputation was so damaged that finding new employment would be extremely difficult. The irony wasn't lost on me that their affair, which had been funded by our joint marital assets, was now costing them their individual financial security. While financial pressure mounted, I began phase 2 of my strategy, systematic social isolation. The charity circuit that had provided both Judd and Penelope with their professional networks was remarkably small and gossip-driven. A few strategic conversations with key influencers were all it took to ensure that their reputations preceded them wherever they went. At the Museum of Fine Arts Gala, I encountered Rebecca Thornton, the Society columnist, whose opinions could make or break social careers. Rebecca approached me with the predatory smile of someone who smelled a story. "Emily, darling," she purred, "you look absolutely radiant. How are you managing everything so gracefully?" "Thank you, Rebecca," I replied with practiced composure. "I've found that maintaining one's dignity in difficult circumstances is really just a matter of focusing on what truly matters: family, real friends, and honest relationship." The subtle emphasis on honest wasn't lost on Rebecca, whose column the following week would include a pointed observation about the importance of integrity in both personal and professional relationships, with specific references to recent scandals involving certain event planners and marketing executives. The advertising industry, like most professional sectors, operated on reputation and word-of-mouth recommendation. Judd's ethical breaches with the Morrison account had spread through the network like a virus, making him radioactive to potential employers. His former colleagues at Sterling & Associates were distancing themselves to protect their own careers, and his industry contacts were suddenly unavailable when he reached out for networking opportunities. I accelerated this process by ensuring that key decision-makers in the industry understood the full scope of Judd's misconduct. Through carefully orchestrated conversations with mutual contacts, I made sure that his expense account fraud was understood not as a simple accounting error, but as a pattern of dishonesty that called his entire professional character into question. The coup de grace came when I arranged for Morrison Hotel Group's CFO Jennifer Walsh to speak about vendor integrity at an advertising industry conference. Her presentation included a case study about financial misconduct by trusted partners that, while not naming Judd specifically, provided enough details that everyone in the audience knew exactly who she was discussing. The pressure I had created was beginning to take its toll on Judd and Penelope's relationship itself. Financial stress, professional humiliation, and social isolation, were testing their bond in ways that their romantic fantasies had never anticipated. Through my private investigator's surveillance, I learned that they were arguing frequently about money, blame, and strategy. Penelope was pressuring Judd to liquidate his assets to help save her business, while Judd was insisting that she was responsible for their public disgrace through her poor planning of the birthday party announcement. Their romantic dinners had been replaced by tense meetings in coffee shops, where they argued about survival rather than celebrated their love. The passion that had supposedly justified destroying my marriage was being consumed by the practical realities of their situation. Judd's family, particularly his mother Chloe, had been horrified by his behavior at my birthday party. But as his professional and financial situation deteriorated, their disappointment was transforming into active intervention. Chloe had reached out to me directly, requesting a private meeting that I had politely but firmly declined. Instead, I arranged for her to receive copies of the financial documentation showing how Judd had used our marital assets to fund his affair. The evidence of his expense account fraud, the hotel bills, the restaurant charges, all of it painted a picture of someone who had not only betrayed his wife, but had done so using her own money. The Prentis family patriarch, Judd's grandfather who controlled the family trust fund, was reportedly considering cutting Judd off entirely. The prospect of losing his inheritance, a substantial sum that represented his only remaining financial security, was creating additional pressure that I monitored with satisfaction. As week 3 approached, I could see that my systematic campaign was achieving its intended effect. Both targets were experiencing cascading failures across multiple areas of their lives: professional, financial, social, and personal. Each new crisis was related to the previous ones, creating a downward spiral that was becoming increasingly difficult for them to manage. More importantly, they were beginning to understand that these weren't random misfortunes or coincidental difficulties. The precision and coordination of their problems was becoming impossible to ignore, and they were starting to realize that someone with intimate knowledge of their vulnerabilities was orchestrating their destruction. Judd's texts had evolved from desperate pleas for reconciliation to paranoid accusations.
I know this is you, Em.
Nobody else could have known about the Morrison expenses.
What do you want?
What will it take to make this stop? Penelope had tried a more direct approach, showing up at my temporary office building and demanding to speak with me. Security had escorted her out, but not before she had made a scene that was witnessed by several other tenants and recorded by the building's security cameras. Their desperation was palpable, and it was only the beginning. I had spent 3 weeks laying the groundwork for their destruction. Now it was time to accelerate the timeline and move into the more aggressive phases of my plan. They had wanted to play games with my life and my emotions. Now they were going to learn that I was far better at games than they had ever imagined possible. By the 4th week after my birthday party, I had shifted my focus almost entirely to Penelope. While Judd's professional destruction had been swift and decisive, Penelope's downfall required more nuanced orchestration. Her business empire was built on relationships, reputation, and the illusion of exclusivity, all of which were more fragile than traditional corporate structures, and therefore more satisfying to dismantle. The state licensing board investigation that Margaret Blackwood had initiated was proceeding with bureaucratic thoroughness. I had supplemented their official inquiry with anonymous submissions of additional evidence, photographs from social media showing Penelope at romantic dinners with married clients, documentation of her pattern of targeting anniversary celebrations and relationship milestones, and testimonials from previous victims who had been hesitant to come forward until now. The most damaging revelation came when I located Rebecca Martinez, the wife from the previous incident, 3 years ago. Rebecca had been devastated by her husband's betrayal and Penelope's role in it, but had never pursued formal complaints due to shame and emotional exhaustion. With my encouragement and strategic support, she was now ready to tell her story publicly. Rebecca's account was devastating in its details: how Penelope had deliberately inserted herself into their marriage, created opportunities for private conversations with her husband, and systematically undermined Rebecca's confidence while positioning herself as the understanding alternative. The pattern was identical to what had happened to me, confirming that Penelope's actions were calculated predation rather than spontaneous passion. Armed with Rebecca's testimony and documented evidence of Penelope's pattern of behavior, I crafted a carefully orchestrated media campaign designed to destroy her reputation permanently. I didn't need tabloid sensationalism. The story was compelling enough on its own. I started with Rebecca Thornton, the society columnist whose opinions shaped elite social circles. Rebecca was always hungry for stories that combined scandal with moral outrage, and Penelope's predatory behavior toward married couples was perfect material for her audience. I'm hearing some very disturbing stories about certain event planners who target married couples. I mentioned during a chance encounter at the opera. Apparently there's a pattern of deliberately seducing married men during their anniversary celebrations and family milestones. It's beyond unethical, it's sociopathic. Rebecca's eyes lit up with predatory interest. Do you have specifics? I couldn't possibly name names, I said with perfect innocence. But I understand there are multiple victims who are finally ready to speak publicly about their experiences. Perhaps the real question is whether our community should continue supporting businesses that profit from destroying families. Within days, Rebecca's column featured a scathing exposé titled "The Predators Among Us: When Service Providers Become Home Wreckers." While carefully avoiding direct accusations, the article provided enough details about certain event planners that everyone in the industry knew exactly who was being discussed. While Penelope's reputation burned in the court of public opinion, I accelerated the financial pressure on her failing business. Through my network of financial contacts, I learned that she was desperately seeking emergency funding to cover the mounting refunds and vendor payments that were bleeding her company dry. I ensured that every potential lender received information about the licensing board investigation and the mounting negative publicity. No reputable financial institution would risk their reputation by funding a business that was facing regulatory scrutiny and public scandal. Penelope's attempts to restructure her debts were systematically blocked as vendors demanded immediate payment in cash rather than accepting payment plans. Her equipment rental company repossessed thousands of dollars worth of lighting and sound equipment. Her preferred catering partners terminated their contracts, citing concerns about association with negative publicity. Even her office lease was terminated when the building management received complaints from other tenants about disruptive behavior stemming from angry former clients confronting her in the lobby. The charity circuit that had provided Penelope's primary client base was remarkably unforgiving when it came to scandal. The women who controlled these organizations had spent decades building their own reputations and were ruthless about protecting their social standing from any association with controversy. Victoria Sterling, whom I had carefully cultivated during our previous conversation, became one of my most effective unwitting allies. As president of the Junior League and a board member of 3 major charities, her opinion carried significant weight. When she began expressing concerns about vendor integrity and the need for thorough background checks, other organizations quickly followed her lead. The Peninsula Club, which had employed Penelope for 5 years, conducted an emergency review of their vendor relationships and terminated her contract, citing reputational concerns. The Chamber of Commerce revoked her membership. The Professional Event Planners Association launched their own ethics investigation that would likely result in her expulsion from the industry organization. The sustained pressure was taking a visible toll on Penelope herself. The confident, magnetic woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation was being replaced by someone who looked increasingly desperate and unstable. Her social media presence, once carefully curated to showcase her glamorous lifestyle and successful events, had become erratic and defensive. She posted increasingly frantic messages defending her right to love and attacking vindictive people who can't accept that sometimes relationships end. These emotional outbursts only reinforced the perception that she was unfit for professional responsibilities and prone to dramatic instability. Her physical appearance was deteriorating as well. The stress of financial ruin and social ostracism was manifesting in weight loss, poor grooming, and an overall aura of defeat that was apparent to anyone who encountered her. The woman who had once commanded rooms with her presence was now someone people actively avoided. The pressure I had created was having its intended effect on Penelope and Judd's relationship. Financial desperation had replaced romantic passion as their primary concern, and the stress was revealing fundamental incompatibilities that had been hidden during the excitement of their secret affair. Through surveillance reports, I learned that their arguments were becoming increasingly bitter and personal. Penelope blamed Judd for being careless about the expense account fraud that had triggered the investigation. Judd blamed Penelope for the disastrous timing and execution of their public announcement. Both were facing the reality that their grand love story was costing them everything they had worked to achieve. The romantic dinners and weekend getaways that had characterized their affair were now impossible, partly due to financial constraints, but mainly because they were both persona non grata at the upscale establishments they had once frequented. Their relationship was reduced to tense meetings in chain restaurants and cheap motels, settings that stripped away any remaining illusion of glamour or sophistication. The coup de grace for Penelope's career came when the Better Business Bureau published their findings regarding the multiple complaints against Gray Matter events. The report detailed a pattern of unethical behavior, financial irregularities, and professional misconduct that made it impossible for any reputable client to justify hiring her services. The state licensing board's investigation concluded with a formal hearing that resulted in the suspension of her event planning license for 2 years, with reinstatement conditional on completing ethics training and paying substantial fines that she could no longer afford. With her professional license suspended, her client base destroyed, her business assets liquidated, and her personal reputation in ruins, Penelope Gray was effectively erased from the industry she had once dominated. The woman who had built her empire on her ability to create perfect moments for others had discovered that her own moment of triumph had been the beginning of her complete destruction. As I reviewed the progress of my campaign against Penelope, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond mere revenge. This was justice, systematic, proportionate, and absolutely final. She had targeted my marriage as a stepping stone to her own happiness, using her professional skills to orchestrate my humiliation. Now those same professional skills, reputation, and networks were gone forever. She had taught me a valuable lesson about the power of calculated cruelty. I had simply become a better student than she had ever been a teacher. 6 weeks after my birthday party, the destruction I had orchestrated was spreading far beyond Judd and Penelope themselves. Their families, friends, and professional associates were being forced to choose sides, and the moral clarity of my position made those choices inevitable. Everyone who had witnessed their calculated cruelty at my birthday party remembered not just the betrayal but the cold precision with which it had been delivered. Judd's younger brother Marcus, who worked at a prestigious law firm downtown, found himself facing uncomfortable questions from partners about his family connections. The legal community was small and reputation sensitive, and Marcus was forced to publicly distance himself from his brother's actions to protect his own career prospects. At a family dinner that I learned about through mutual contacts, Marcus had apparently told Judd that his behavior was professionally and personally toxic, and that any continued association would be career suicide. The Prentis family patriarch, Judd's grandfather Harrison, made his position clear by removing Judd from his will entirely. The family trust fund that had provided Judd with financial security and social standing was now permanently beyond his reach. Harrison had built his fortune on ethical business practices and considered Judd's expense account fraud a betrayal of everything the family name represented. Penelope's professional isolation was becoming absolute. The Event Planning Association of the Pacific had voted to expel her from membership following their ethics investigation. Without professional credentials or industry connections, she was effectively barred from working in her chosen field anywhere in the region. More devastating was the action taken by the vendors and suppliers who had formed the backbone of her business operations. Caterers, florists, venues, and equipment rental companies had all blacklisted her, sharing information about her pattern of unethical behavior and financial instability. Even if she could somehow resurrect her business, she would be unable to access the resources needed to execute events. The social circle that had sustained her career was equally unforgiving. Women like Margaret Blackwood and Victoria Sterling wielded enormous influence over charitable organizations and society events. Their collective decision to ostracize Penelope had created a social quarantine that extended to anyone foolish enough to associate with her publicly. Financial pressure had reached its inevitable conclusion. Penelope's downtown condo had been foreclosed upon when she defaulted on the predatory loan she had taken to cover client refunds. The luxury apartment that had served as both her home and a showcase for potential clients was now someone else's property. She had been forced to move into a studio apartment in a part of town that was a 40-minute commute from the social centers where she had once reigned supreme. The psychological impact of this geographic exile was as devastating as the financial implications. She was now literally outside the world she had spent decades cultivating. Judd's situation was more complex but equally dire. Our shared loft remained technically joint property, but I had initiated formal divorce proceedings that would force its sale. Unable to afford the mortgage payments on his own and legally prohibited from accessing our joint accounts, pending the settlement, he was essentially trapped in a home he could no longer afford and would soon lose. The ultimate proof of their complete social exile came at the annual Harbor Foundation Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the season. Both Judd and Penelope had been fixtures at this event for years, Judd as a corporate sponsor through Sterling and Associates, and Penelope as the preferred event coordinator for many of the attending families. This year, neither received an invitation. More pointedly, I attended as the guest of Paul Gibson, representing Pinnacle Wealth Management's continued commitment to charitable giving. My presence served as a stark reminder to the assembled elite about the consequences of betraying trust and violating social boundaries. The evening was a masterclass in social dynamics. I was embraced warmly by people who had witnessed my humiliation and now wanted to demonstrate their loyalty to the wronged party. Former mutual friends of Judd and Penelope approached me with careful expressions of support, each interaction serving to reinforce the community's collective judgment about who deserved sympathy and who deserved exile. As I moved through the elegant ballroom where I had once attended events with both of them, I realized that their absence was more powerful than their presence had ever been. They had become cautionary tales, examples of what happened when ambition and selfishness overrode basic human decency. 2 months after my birthday party, the consequences of my strategic campaign had taken on a life of their own. What I had begun as a calculated response to betrayal had evolved into an unstoppable avalanche of destruction that was consuming everything in its path. The precision of my initial strikes had triggered chain reactions that continued to devastate Judd and Penelope's lives in ways I hadn't even planned. The financial markets, it turned out, were remarkably interconnected. When Sterling and Associates lost the Morrison Hotel Group contract, it triggered a domino effect that reached far beyond Judd's personal employment. The agency was forced to lay off 30% of its staff, and several other major clients questioned the firm's oversight and ethical standards. Partners who had initially supported Judd's suspension were now grateful he was gone, as his continued association would have made their recovery impossible. This broader industry impact meant that Judd wasn't just unemployable at Sterling and Associates, he was radioactive throughout the entire advertising sector. No company wanted to risk association with someone whose ethical breaches had contributed to industry-wide scrutiny of billing practices. The civil litigation that had begun with client refund demands was expanding exponentially. Rebecca Martinez, emboldened by the support she had received, had filed a lawsuit against Penelope for intentional interference with her marriage. The legal precedent was murky, but the public relations impact was devastating. More clients began coming forward with their own stories of Penelope's inappropriate behavior. What had started as whispered gossip was becoming documented testimony in depositions and court filings. Each new case added weight to the pattern of predatory behavior that was emerging, making it impossible for Penelope to claim that her actions with Judd were isolated incidents driven by genuine emotion. The state licensing board's investigation had expanded beyond Penelope's individual conduct to examine the broader regulatory framework for event planning businesses. Her case was becoming a cautionary tale used to justify stricter oversight of vendor relationships and client interactions throughout the industry. The collateral damage to their families was becoming severe. Judd's parents, Harrison and Chloe Prentis, were facing social ostracism in their own circles. Country club memberships were quietly terminated, charity board positions were not renewed, and longtime friends began avoiding them at social events. The Prentis family name, built over 3 generations of ethical business practices, was now associated with scandal and moral failure. Penelope's elderly mother, who lived in an assisted living facility, was experiencing confusion and distress as former friends stopped visiting and staff members began treating the family differently. The social isolation was affecting her health, creating yet another layer of guilt and pressure that Penelope was struggling to manage. Even their professional associates were suffering consequences. Vendors who had worked closely with Penelope found their own reputations tainted by association. Catering companies that had relied on her referrals saw their business decline as clients questioned their judgment in partnering with someone of questionable ethics. What had begun as a society column story was now attracting attention from mainstream media outlets. The story had all the elements that journalists loved: wealth, betrayal, professional misconduct, and a wronged wife who had orchestrated an elegant revenge. Rebecca Thornton's initial column had been picked up by larger publications, each adding new details and expanding the scope of the scandal. A local television news program aired a segment about predatory service providers that featured Penelope's case as the primary example. While they were careful to avoid actionable accusations, the coverage included interviews with multiple victims and industry experts discussing the need for better consumer protection in the events industry. The online component was particularly brutal. Social media had amplified every aspect of the story, with amateur investigators adding their own research and commentary. Penelope's business was being dissected across multiple platforms, with users sharing screenshots of her past social media posts and analyzing them for evidence of her manipulative behavior. The banking industry's response to the expense account fraud had been swift and comprehensive. Not only was Judd facing criminal charges for his misuse of corporate credit cards, but financial institutions throughout the region had flagged him as a high-risk client. His personal credit rating had been destroyed, making it impossible for him to secure loans, mortgages, or even basic banking services. This financial blacklisting extended to anyone closely associated with him. Penelope found that her attempts to open new business accounts were being rejected due to her romantic relationship with someone under financial crimes investigation. The interconnected nature of their personal and professional lives, which had once seemed romantic, was now ensuring that each other's destruction was mutual and complete. The investigation had also revealed additional financial irregularities in both their backgrounds. Judd's expense account fraud was part of a larger pattern of financial misconduct that included tax evasion and insurance fraud. Penelope's business practices included several instances of client deposit misappropriation that bordered on embezzlement. 3 months after my birthday party, Judd and Penelope's relationship had disintegrated into something barely recognizable as the grand love affair they had proclaimed in front of 60 witnesses. The financial pressure, legal troubles, and social ostracism had stripped away every romantic illusion, leaving only two desperate people clinging to the wreckage of their former lives. Through Marcus Webb's continued surveillance, I learned that their arguments had escalated from bitter recriminations to genuine hostility. Penelope blamed Judd for being careless enough to get caught with the expense account fraud. Judd blamed Penelope for orchestrating the disastrous public announcement that had made their private affair a public scandal. Neither was willing to accept responsibility for the chain of events that had led to their mutual destruction. The studio apartment where Penelope was now living had become the setting for increasingly violent arguments. Neighbors had called police twice in the past month to respond to domestic disturbance complaints. The woman who had once glided through society events with perfect composure was now screaming profanities in a cheap apartment complex, while her former lover threatened to leave her entirely. The district attorney's office had filed formal charges against Judd for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. The amount involved, over $200,000 in misappropriated funds, qualified as grand theft and carried a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison. His court-appointed attorney had advised him that pleading guilty might result in a reduced sentence, but any conviction would permanently bar him from working in financial services or marketing. Penelope faced her own legal troubles as the investigation into her business practices expanded. Client deposit misappropriation charges were being prepared by the state attorney general's office, and the IRS had launched a comprehensive audit of her taxes for the past 5 years. The pattern of financial misconduct that emerged painted a picture of someone who had been systematically defrauding clients for years. The civil lawsuits were multiplying as well. Rebecca Martinez's interference case had inspired 3 other former clients to file similar suits. The damages being sought totaled over $1 million, money that neither Judd nor Penelope had any hope of paying. The comprehensive nature of their professional destruction had become clear as both attempted to find new employment. Judd's applications to advertising agencies, marketing firms, and even retail management positions were being rejected within days of submission. Background checks immediately revealed his criminal charges and professional misconduct, making him unemployable in any position requiring trust or financial responsibility. Penelope's attempts to rebrand herself in related industries, wedding planning, corporate events, even restaurant management, were equally futile. The event planning industry was remarkably small and interconnected. Her reputation had spread to related fields through vendor networks and professional associations. Even businesses outside her immediate industry were hesitant to hire someone with her documented history of targeting clients' personal relationships. The psychological toll of repeated rejection was becoming visible in both of them. Marcus Webb's reports described two people who looked years older than their actual ages, showing signs of stress, depression, and what appeared to be substance abuse problems. The final death blow to their relationship came when Penelope attempted to secure employment by approaching some of Judd's former colleagues, hoping to leverage whatever remained of his professional connections. The humiliation of being rejected by people who had once been subordinates was too much for Judd's already fragile ego. Their confrontation, which took place in the parking lot of a chain restaurant where they could no longer afford fine dining, was witnessed by multiple customers who recorded portions of it on their phones. The video showed Judd screaming accusations of betrayal while Penelope sobbed and pleaded with him not to abandon her. "You destroyed everything," Judd's voice carried across the parking lot. "My career, my family, my entire life. All for what? Some fantasy about true love. Look around, Penelope. This is what your true love got us." Penelope's response was equally damaging. "You think this is my fault? You're the one who got caught stealing from your own company. You're the one who was too stupid to cover his tracks. I planned the perfect moment to announce our love, and you ruined it with your carelessness." Within days of their public confrontation, Judd had moved out of Penelope's studio apartment and into a homeless shelter downtown. His pride was still too intact to contact his family for help, and his criminal charges made him ineligible for most transitional housing programs. The man who had once lived in a $2 million loft was now sleeping on a cot in a room with 40 other men who had lost everything. Penelope's isolation became complete. Without Judd's presence, even fractured and hostile as it had become, she was entirely alone with the consequences of her actions. Her attempts to reach out to former friends were met with blocked phone numbers and returned letters. Her family had distanced themselves to avoid association with her legal troubles. The woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation as the perfect stage for announcing her triumph was now living in complete solitude, unemployable, financially ruined, and abandoned by everyone she had ever claimed to love. As I received Marcus Webb's final report on their separation, I realized that my campaign of strategic revenge had achieved something beyond mere justice. I had demonstrated that actions truly do have consequences, and that betrayal carries a price that compounds with interest until it consumes everything the betrayer holds dear. They had wanted to write me out of their story, but instead, I had become the author of their complete destruction. By the end of the second month, it had become clear that the damage I had orchestrated was permanent and irreversible. The avalanche had gained so much momentum that even if I had wanted to stop it, the consequences would continue to multiply independently of my actions. Judd and Penelope had crossed the point where recovery was possible. Their professional reputations were so thoroughly destroyed that rehabilitation would take decades, if it was possible at all. Their financial situation was so dire that bankruptcy was inevitable. Their social standing was so completely annihilated that even geographical relocation wouldn't restore their credibility. They had wanted to destroy my life to make room for their own happiness. Instead, they had triggered the complete destruction of everything they had built, while I emerged stronger and more successful than ever before. 4 months after my birthday party, I received a call that I had been expecting for weeks. Judd's voice on the other end of the line was barely recognizable, hoarse, defeated, stripped of every trace of the confidence that had once made him so attractive to both clients and mistresses. "Emily," he said, and I could hear the effort it took for him to keep his voice steady. "I need to see you, please, just once. I know I have no right to ask, but there are things that need to be said before before this all ends. The before this all ends was telling. Through my various sources, I knew that his criminal sentencing was scheduled for the following week. His attorney had negotiated a plea bargain that would result in 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation, and a lifetime ban from working in financial services. The man who had once managed million-dollar marketing campaigns was facing a future of menial labor and permanent professional exile. "I suppose we could meet," I said, after a deliberate pause. "Somewhere public, of course. I wouldn't want anyone to think I was being vindictive by meeting with you privately." The location I chose was symbolically perfect, the same restaurant where we had celebrated our engagement 6 years earlier. Le Bernardin had been the setting for what I thought was one of the happiest moments of my life. Now it would host what I knew would be the final conversation of our relationship. When I arrived at Le Bernardin that evening, I was struck by how much Judd had deteriorated in the months since I'd last seen him. The man sitting alone at our old corner table looked like a broken version of the person I had once loved. His expensive suit had been replaced by a cheap off-the-rack jacket that hung poorly on his diminished frame. His once perfect hair was unkempt, and his skin had the gray pallor of someone who wasn't sleeping or eating properly. "Thank you for coming," he said, as I took the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm curious to hear what you think we have left to discuss," I replied, maintaining the cool composure that had served me so well over the past 4 months. He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before looking up at me. "I know it was you," he said quietly. "All of it. The Morrison investigation, the licensing board complaints against Penelope, the media coverage, everything. I know you orchestrated it all." I tilted my head slightly, neither confirming nor denying his accusation. "That's quite a conspiracy theory, Judd. Are you suggesting that I somehow forced you to commit expense account fraud? That I manipulated you into having an affair? That I made you announce your betrayal at my birthday party?" "No," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You didn't make me do any of those things. But you made sure that everyone found out about them. You made sure that every mistake, every poor decision, every moment of weakness became public knowledge." He leaned forward, his eyes searching my face for some trace of the woman he had once been married to. "I understand why you did it. What we did to you was unforgivable. The way we announced it, the timing, the public humiliation, it was cruel beyond words." "Yes," I agreed calmly, "it was. But he continued, using the nickname that now sounded like a foreign language coming from his lips. "Don't you think we've paid enough? My career is over, my family has disowned me. I'm going to prison. Penelope has lost everything. Her business, her home, her reputation. We've both been destroyed." I studied his face, noting the desperation in his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way his voice broke slightly when he mentioned Penelope's name. This was a man who had been broken completely, and he was making one final appeal to whatever mercy he hoped I might still possess. "You want to know if I think you've paid enough?" I asked, setting down my wine glass with deliberate precision. "Let me tell you what I think you've paid." I leaned back in my chair, my voice taking on the measured tone I used when delivering financial assessments to clients. "You've paid the professional consequences of committing fraud. You've paid the social consequences of betraying people who trusted you. You've paid the financial consequences of living beyond your means and making poor decisions." His face was growing paler as I continued. "But what you haven't paid," I said, my voice dropping to match his earlier whisper, "is the emotional cost of what you did to me. You haven't paid for the nights I spent, wondering what was wrong with me. You haven't paid for the humiliation of having my marriage end in front of everyone I know. You haven't paid for the 12 years of friendship with Penelope that you both destroyed for your own gratification." I stood up from the table, gathering my purse with the same careful precision I had used to gather evidence against them both. "So no, Judd, I don't think you've paid enough. I don't think you'll ever pay enough. Because some debts can't be settled with money, or prison time or professional exile. Some debts last forever." As I turned to leave, Judd called out my name one last time. When I looked back, he was crying, not the dignified tears of someone facing adversity with grace, but the desperate sobs of someone who had finally understood the true scope of what he had lost. "I loved you," he said, his voice breaking completely. "I know you don't believe that anymore, but I did love you. I still do." I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing this final image of the man who had once been my husband. Then I smiled. the same cold, controlled smile I had perfected at my birthday party 4 months earlier. "I know you did," I replied. "That's what makes this so perfect." And with that, I walked out of Le Bernardin and out of Judd Prentis's life forever. In the days following my final meeting with Judd, I found myself in an unusual state of emotional equilibrium. The restaurant where we had met was the same one where he had proposed to me 6 years earlier, and the symbolism of that full-circle moment had provided a sense of closure that I hadn't expected to feel. Judd was sentenced the following week to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge's comments during sentencing made it clear that the court viewed his crimes as particularly egregious because they had involved the systematic betrayal of trust over an extended period. The financial institutions he had defrauded would never fully recover their losses, and his victims included not just his employers, but the wife who had unknowingly funded his affair with joint marital assets. Penelope's legal troubles continued to multiply. The state attorney general's office had filed criminal charges for client deposit misappropriation, and the civil lawsuits from former clients were proceeding toward trial. Even if she avoided prison time, the financial judgments would ensure that she would spend the rest of her life in poverty, paying restitution to the people she had defrauded. While their lives collapsed around them, my own professional trajectory had taken an unexpected upward turn. The grace and composure I had displayed throughout the scandal had impressed colleagues and clients alike. Paul Gibson had promoted me to senior partner at Pinnacle Wealth Management, a position that came with a substantial salary increase and equity stake in the firm. More importantly, my strategic thinking and crisis management skills had attracted attention from other firms. I was receiving offers from investment banks and financial consulting companies that recognized my ability to navigate complex professional and personal challenges with remarkable effectiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same analytical skills I had used to destroy Judd and Penelope were now being rewarded with professional advancement. The methodical planning, strategic thinking, and flawless execution that had characterized my revenge campaign were exactly the qualities that made me valuable in high-stakes financial environments. My social standing had been completely transformed as well. The women who controlled the charity circuit and society events had embraced me as a symbol of dignified resilience in the face of betrayal. I was invited to serve on boards, chair committees, and host events in a way that would have been impossible when I was simply Judd's wife. Margaret Blackwood had personally recruited me to join the Harbor Foundation board, citing my exceptional character and strategic thinking as valuable assets to their mission. Victoria Sterling had made me her co-chair for the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser, a position that would give me significant influence over the social calendar and charitable priorities for the coming year. The shift in my social position was remarkable. I had gone from being a successful but somewhat invisible member of our community to being one of its most respected and influential figures. The betrayal that was supposed to diminish me had instead elevated me to a level of authority and respect that I had never previously enjoyed. Yet as I sat in my new corner office overlooking the harbor, reviewing the financial portfolios of clients who trusted me with their life savings, I found myself experiencing an emotion I hadn't anticipated: emptiness. The campaign of revenge that had consumed 4 months of my life was complete. Judd was in prison, Penelope was facing financial and legal ruin, and their relationship had been destroyed as thoroughly as my marriage had been. Justice had been served with mathematical precision, and the consequences had been proportionate to the betrayal that had triggered them. But now, with the immediate goal accomplished, I was forced to confront a more complex question: what came next? For 4 months, every decision I had made was focused on a single objective: the systematic destruction of the people who had betrayed me. My days had been filled with strategy sessions, intelligence gathering, and careful orchestration of consequences. The work had been consuming, intellectually stimulating, and deeply satisfying. Now that the work was complete, I was left with the realization that revenge, no matter how perfectly executed, was ultimately a finite goal. It could destroy what existed, but it couldn't create anything new to replace it. As I looked back on the woman I had been 4 months earlier, trusting, optimistic, perhaps naively confident in the stability of my relationships, I recognized that she was gone forever. The betrayal had killed her as surely as if it had been a physical assault, and what had emerged from that death was someone harder, more calculating, and infinitely more dangerous. This new version of myself was undeniably more successful, more respected, and more powerful than the woman who had walked into that birthday party expecting to celebrate another year of happiness. But she was also more isolated, more suspicious, and more aware of the capacity for cruelty that existed in both herself and others. The question that haunted my quiet moments was whether this transformation represented growth or loss. Had I become a better version of myself, stripped of naive illusions and equipped with a clearer understanding of human nature, or had I sacrificed something essential about my capacity for trust, love, and genuine connection? The answer, I was beginning to realize, would determine not just how I felt about my revenge, but how I would live the rest of my life. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to my office by courier with my name written in handwriting I recognized, despite not having seen it in months. Inside was a single sheet of paper, expensive stationery that Penelope must have purchased before her financial collapse, containing just a few lines. Emily, I know you'll never forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. Not just your marriage, but your trust in people, your belief in friendship, your faith in love itself. That's the real crime, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I hope someday you can find happiness again. You deserve it more than anyone. Penelope, I read the letter twice, then placed it in the file folder that contained all the documentation of my campaign against them. It would be the final entry in that chapter of my life. 3 days later, I was surprised to receive a call from my assistant announcing that Mrs. Chloe Prentis was in the lobby, requesting a meeting. Judd's mother was the last person I expected to see, but curiosity compelled me to agree to the meeting. Chloe looked older than her 62 years, her elegant composure worn down by months of family scandal and social ostracism. She sat across from my desk with the careful posture of someone who was no longer certain of her welcome anywhere. "Thank you for seeing me, Emily," she said, her voice carrying a weariness that hadn't been there when I knew her as my mother-in-law. "I know I have no right to ask for your time. What can I do for you, Chloe?" I asked, maintaining professional courtesy while keeping my emotional distance. "I wanted to apologize," she said simply, "for my son's behavior, for the pain he caused you, for the way our family failed to raise a man who could honor his commitments, and I wanted to thank you." The last part surprised me. Thank you? For showing him the true consequences of his choices, for refusing to enable his behavior or make excuses for his actions, for demonstrating that betrayal carries a real price. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Judd needed to learn that lesson, even if it destroyed him in the process, perhaps especially because it destroyed him. After Chloe left, I spent the evening walking through the city streets, processing not just her words but the entire journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I had been someone else entirely, trusting, perhaps naive, certainly unprepared for the capacity for cruelty that existed in people I loved. The woman who emerged from that betrayal was undeniably stronger, more successful, more respected, but she was also lonelier, more guarded, more aware of the darkness that existed in human relationships. The question that had haunted me for weeks remained, was this transformation worth the price I had paid? As I walked past Le Bernardin, the restaurant where I had delivered my final judgment to Judd, I realized that the answer didn't matter. The woman I had been was gone, destroyed as completely as Judd and Penelope's lives had been. Mourning her was as pointless as mourning any other casualty of their betrayal. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Marcus Webb and terminated his services permanently. I deleted all the surveillance files, closed the investigation folders, and cleared out the evidence that had consumed so much of my time and energy. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I made plans that had nothing to do with revenge, consequences, or justice. I called Lucy in Denver and accepted her long-standing invitation to visit. I scheduled a vacation to Italy, not the honeymoon destination I had visited with Judd, but a completely new itinerary that would create fresh memories. Most importantly, I began to consider what I wanted to build rather than what I wanted to destroy. At a charity board meeting the following week, I met Dr. Alexander Gray, a widowed trauma surgeon who approached relationships with the same careful attention to detail that I had developed. Our conversation was tentative but genuine, marked by the mutual recognition of two people who had been tested by life and emerged changed but not broken. 6 months after my birthday party, I understood that revenge had served its purpose. It had restored balance, taught necessary lessons, and demonstrated that actions truly do have consequences. But it had also revealed something more important: the capacity for both destruction and creation that exists within each of us. Judd and Penelope had chosen to use their power to destroy my life for their own gratification. I had responded by using my power to destroy theirs for my own justice. But now, with that chapter closed, I had the opportunity to choose what kind of power I wanted to wield going forward. The woman who had been betrayed at her birthday party was gone forever. The woman who had orchestrated perfect revenge was a part of my history, but the woman who would write the next chapter of this story, that woman was still being created, and she would be entirely under my control. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. This was one of them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.